My name is Augustin Blanchard. I work at TKO Capital and I invest in cybersecurity companies, startups, and we deploy capital for startups to become scale-ups. Ingrid?
Welcome everyone, my name is Ingrid Solner. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of Tetris. We are a scale-up now, so that's the topic of today, scaling up in Europe in the cloud and in cybersecurity. Tetris edits software that detects and blocks cyber attacks in real time in companies and administrations. And we are in part funded by TKO Capital. We are here today with Christian, Florent, Luc and Andreas, and we're going to talk about the topic, or follow-up of the topic that you heard before, which is the impact of the cloud, both in cybersecurity and also how the cloud helps or maybe hinders you into scaling up. So we are here with European scale-ups from France and from Germany, and eager to hear you on both of these topics.
So before we go into the first question, maybe gentlemen, you could sit down. It's not because I'm standing up that you should stand up. I prefer moving. It's maybe more dynamic for you guys. Coffee break is around the corner. Bear with us a few moments. So maybe two remarks before we dive in. Olivier, in the introduction, gave us a challenge. At the very last words of Olivier were, we have to find another way. So this is a challenge that we want to accept, and in the end, I hope during this panel we will have found another way to do what? Another way to do scale up, and to scale up our cybersecurity companies, which are assembled here, and how can we make sure that within this trusted cloud environment we let champions and European champions emerge out of it. So my first question is to Christian, and disclaimer, TKO Capital, my fund, is invested in Christian's company, so if at some point there is favoritism, please blow the whistle. But my first question is to Christian. Christian, you just raised a Series A with us. And what do you need to scale up? To go from startup, which is seed, pre-seed, to scale up. You entered the scale-up phase, Series A, B, hopefully C, D sometimes. What do you need from now on?
So thank you. Yeah, I'm also partial. Yeah, he's a great guy, wonderful investor firm. Yeah, I only can say the best things about him. But honestly, when you think about what made us come to that point, it was that we had the chance of working as a German company with its hub in Barcelona with a French investor. So really being European. And I think this cleverness, I think someone said that before, this being smart about being European is something that you need to have in order to scale. So we started in Munich with the company, and very, very early, like after a few months, we set up the Barcelona office. And by now we have 40 people in Barcelona and 5 in Munich. And that tells you already about where we find talent. It's not where we started, and also not where our customers are. They're mainly in the DACH region, and then to some part, of course, in Spain, and hopefully soon even more in France. But you need to work with everything you have in Europe in order to be scaling. This is money. We have investors from Spain, we have investors from Germany, we have investors from France, so really European as well. We are searching for talent all over Europe, and we find a lot of that in Barcelona. We have employed Greek people, Italian people, French people, German people, all in Barcelona. Also using the nicety of that town, and everybody likes to live in Barcelona, apparently. But then, after you have secured that talent and money, still it's the customers. And this is something where we are seeing a challenge, of course, that you come as a German company with looking at German companies as your customers, but that's not enough to scale. It brought us up to here. It brought us to a very good growth rate, but now it needs to become very open to every European country. It's not, as you would say, a US company would restrict itself, saying, no, I only do California. Well, big enough, yeah, or I only do North Carolina or something. Yeah, they would go for the big market. And we need to do the same in Europe. And then being clever about what every country demands of you. It's a different regulation, it's a different language, it's a different culture. And we would wish, in order to scale more, that companies, customers, and the regulation becomes more European. I'm not saying that you need to lose your differences for these countries, because that's something that protects us from the big US guys coming in and saying, oh, it's a flat market. Yeah, I can do whatever I like as I do it in the US. Same legal, same language, same behavior. But there needs to be a favor for companies to buy from other European companies. Yeah? To have that, thinking about the values, that's one important part for that, but also have an incentive in buying because of tax reasons, because of subsidies, because of we being better in being able to set up quicker shop and an organization in these countries. And only then are we able not only to be clever about the money, about the talent, but also about scaling to the customers. And that's ultimately what you want from us, yeah? Scaling our annual recurring revenue.
Yes, I confirm. We want that. Okay, the next question. The next question is about. I mean, you mentioned the customers, and the market investors want you to sell more and more product, good products, hopefully, that people buy, and consumers and corporates buy. For that, we have a good example how to sell the US players in cybersecurity, XDRs, CrowdStrike, and these big guys, they know how to sell. Florent, you're based in the US now.
We have some activity.
You have some activity in the US. Could you tell us more on what you know about the market? What are the key points that you extract from being in the United States, in the US, that we could use in Europe to better sell products, mostly?
There are two questions. First, I can introduce maybe who we are. So Cryptonext Security is a startup which is working in the field of post-quantum cryptography. So our job is to address what we call the quantum threat. So the fact that a quantum computer will be able tomorrow to break all our cryptography, and public key cryptography precisely. So this will have a systemic, let's say, impact, and all organizations will have to move to some what we call quantum safe infrastructure or embedded product, if we speak about product. So this is our job. And we are, let's say, in a green field. We were in a green field a few months or few years ago in this topic, innovative subject. And we are lucky because we already have some activity in US, some project. We participate to standardization bodies. We were selected by the US administration for participating to a collaborative project with also US companies, and mainly US companies. So we have an interesting view to compare what is going now in Europe and in US. So there is first, on this topic, and after I will go to the culture of the company, of course, in US. But on this topic, what we can see is that the US public actions, public organization, let's say, or policies, there is a really huge, complete holistic view of innovative problematic. It means they see, of course, there is a question of technology. You need to develop innovative technology ready for deployment and so on. But there is also a question of standards. We spoke about it in the previous speech. There is a question of regulation, and there is a question of market. Last December, I was lucky I met the organization ARPA. So there are several ARPA, It was with Jedi Foundation, so they organized this. And it was really interesting to listen how they see innovation. And from the beginning, never mind if you speak about cybersecurity, energy, healthcare, and so on, they see the problematic of the market, how we can develop the market. And you have no innovation without market. This is a key question. Of course, you can find everywhere good scientists, good people who will develop technology and so on. But you will be able to develop champions only if you have a market. This is a question. You will be able to take industrial advantage if you lead the standards. Because behind standards, you can have some question of intellectual property. You have also a question of leading the standards, the industrial view of the deployment and so on. So on the global view, first part of the answer is to have a holistic view of innovation. Second part, of course, and this is more common, let's say, US companies, they think first about products and about clients. Well, this is very easy, everybody knows this, but we can see, and at Kryptonex, we are a spin-off of a French Institute of Research, so we are really based on scientific excellence, let's say. So it's a good point. But, and when internally, even when we discuss about the presentation of the competitors, they say, but it's slideshow. It's only slides without any product behind. But never mind, they succeed to convince clients with this future project. So the culture of product, more than the culture of technology, in simple world.
That's a good one. In terms of product, and this is a question that's directed to both Andreas and Luc, so we'll have to choose who goes first. Your point, Florent, of building a product, building a better product, better than the competition, differentiated with the competition, which is mostly in the US. How do you two guys approach the European way of doing cybersecurity, of building European cybersecurity products that differentiate themselves from the US competition specifically? How do you approach that? And do you have a few good names?
Good morning. I think there is a main difference coming from the fact that we have a different conception of the data itself and the data ownership itself. With the GDPR, and I think it's a strong value in Europe, the data belongs to the one that produces the data. And that's a major difference with the American approach or even the Chinese approach, where the data either belongs to the public authorities on the one hand or to the people managing the data on the other hand. That means that if you pay for a service, then you have the right to use the data that are processed in the service. So the way we conceive our products is totally different because of this first main differentiation in the concept of the data ownership. And I think it leads us to protect the data and make sure that whoever has seized the data passing, by the way, by the different cloud services or applications or database has no access to the data itself. So it's a different approach of cybersecurity itself. I don't know what to tell you more about that, but the way we conceive our product is cybersecurity by design because of the GDPR. It's main difference, I think, with our competitors. Data breaches are an obsession. So it's not only data loss, it's also data breach. So it's the two things that we have to take into account.
Thank you, Luc. And I think, Andreas, you have a lot to say about data privacy, right?
I could blow the timeline, but to not repeat what Lucas said, Where do we differentiate from the US was one of your questions. And of course, one of the differentiators is what you said. If we put products on charts, we can deliver that product. Yeah. So we're not a good PowerPoint company with one engineer and 20 marketeers. That's of course something that is sometimes hard to sell. Yeah, because we, on the other hand, tend to then very fast go into technical details in presentations where customer says, yeah, let's stay here. That's one of the challenges we have. If we look at how do we approach cybersecurity differently than in the US, and one thing was discussed in the previous discussion. But if you look at the two cloud providers sitting here, Jonas and OVH, in the previous session, we approach it by basically saying, we don't build cybersecurity, we build trust tech. Yeah, I mean, there's no industry for trust tech, so we can't really call that. We might shape a name there, but what we basically say, if you leverage the technology layer that we use, you can put it on any of these infrastructures, be it Jonas, OVH. You can also use some of the temporary niche players from the US, like Google or Microsoft. But we break the vertical or horizontal barrier while still having trust in what you just said. The data stays within your control, or the application for that matter. I mean, we talked about AI, and we have customers in the AI industry who say, we don't care about data. Our IP is what we want to protect. We want to protect our algorithms. Of course, they care about data, but what they want to really protect is that their customers don't steal their IP. So they buy our tech stack to protect their IP, and the data protection comes embedded with the solution. So this is something, when we look at the difference between the US, and we just tested that 2 weeks ago while we were visiting a conference at the West Coast, the view is, even in the US, very nationalistic. If you go to a European company and say, oh, got a great cloud called Jonas, they say, where's the infrastructure? Oh, say it's Jonas, infrastructure in Europe. Oh, no, it needs to stay in the US. So they don't want to understand from a marketing perspective that we want the stuff here, but they think the same way when it's about their infrastructure. So we need to understand that a lot of what they're saying is selling and not believing in that they for themselves. So they kind of don't eat their own cookies, and that is what we're trying to address to the market. Say we're a European company, we're European focused, yeah. And when we tried to raise capital at the West Coast, the message was, why do we need a European company? A US company going to take the global market. We got one here in the US. They have 10 times as much money as you have. They're going to roll over you like nothing. So okay, let's go for the bet. We take money from Europe and we'll try to make it. And we hope we also get the zero more that the US companies usually have in one of our next rounds. Yeah.
Okay, so we are throwing now big words right now. Because you are talking about basically what I call protectionism in the way the US is doing business, right? They develop standards that enable them to stay afloat while preventing other maybe Europeans or Asian companies to get in and to provoke sound competition. But before we get into that, I would have another question to ask to you and maybe do a quick brush up. So Christian told us to be a scale-up, we need to sell. Florent told us to sell, you need a product that's beyond the slides. And
we'll make a good company.
That's for sure. But it's obvious, but sometimes you tend to forget it. I have seen many pitches about a few slides and not a product. But you told us a good product to sell is a good thing, and Luc and Andreas, you told us about building differentiated products compared to the US, and one way to do it is build natively secured products to prevent data breaches, data leak, data theft. Beyond cybersecurity. So next question is to Christian. You are building with your software natively secured apps. So do you think, I'm sure you think so, but for the rhetoric of it, what's the future, and could we define the European way of doing cybersecurity as building better software, better code, better products to prevent cybersecurity needs in the first place, and preventing, let's say, people from CrowdStrike or these big US giants to flood us with, let's say, poor solutions to prevent cyber attacks, whereas we have the building block of cybersecurity, of European cybersecurity, right here.
So of course I agree, yeah, but I also agree because I don't have the feeling that GDPR alone will protect us all and create a great market. The data trust is important. That's a value, of course. But is it so important that our customers would say, I'd rather go for a European that is saying they have GDPR and not for the big American ones, where I can tell to my boss, it was Amazon, it was Google, it was Microsoft, yeah? What can go wrong? There's that old saying, yeah? No one ever was fired for buying from IBM. And this is our main problem when we go to the market, that we are, of course, yeah, you get into the door because you're European, because you say we're GDPR compliant, but then certification as well, yeah. But then it comes to that point where they say, yeah, but about price, but can I tell my superiors about why am I buying from a small European startup or scale-up and not from IBM? Why am I buying that solution despite it being maybe more expensive, and we're using AWS, and sorry, not Ionos, but because AWS gave us 100,000 euros when we started in credits. And 100,000 euro for a startup, that's a lot of money. Yeah, so we basically didn't pay for our cloud infrastructure in the first 3 years. That is in the business plan, by the way. Yeah. But in any case, yeah, this is, eventually, it comes down to having the better product that is saving them money, that is saving them efforts, yeah? And I believe shift left security, doing it by design, doing a better product is the way to do that. And where there is a value in Europe that goes beyond regulation, everybody can regulate and everybody can adapt, yeah? And lawyers make a lot of money out of it, but where there's a fundamental thing in Europe where they say, I want to have something built in Europe, built in Germany, built in France, built in Spain, that is better than what I get from other countries or from the US or from China that has quality in it. And that quality belief, shift left security is one thing for cybersecurity, doing that right from the beginning, yeah, saving costs in the long time. This is an argument that holds in front of a presentation for purchasing and in front of a CIO buying that software. Because he looks at the total cost of ownership and wants it to be secure, but for him to say it is more secure than the claims that Google is doing right now, especially fully going in Europe for compliance. Yeah, the Google Cloud guys, the Looker guys, we're part of the Google Growth Program. They say, yeah, we are compliant, of course, with everything you throw at us. Yeah, it takes us 2 weeks, yeah, and we have enough engineers and enough resources to get a compliance out of that. So that is not protecting our product, and that is not protecting our market just to be better compliant with something. It needs to have a value for the company, and that's why I believe quality and shift left is the answer to that, and that is selling.
That's great, and actually in Europe we are starting to get regulations. I mean, DORA is arriving, we have NIS2, we have also the Cyber Resilience Act. I heard about it a few weeks ago, actually, and it's in the limbos somehow, but it's progressing. And my last question before we turn to a few questions from the audience is a bit provocative, and it's addressed to you three right now, because Christian talked already twice, so you have the opportunity to speak up. Yeah, favoritism. Can we create an educated protectionism for cybersecurity in Europe with regulations? Is it a good idea, and can we do it? Because the US are doing it.
So let me start. I do not believe that we need an educated protectionism. What I believe is that we need an educated understanding of what you're doing. So we had in the earlier discussion the term of transparency. So the regulation sets a framework, and in the regulation we embed our values, civil, legal, economic, all whatever our value framework is. And our value framework in Europe is different to that from some of the Asian countries, some of the North American countries. We embed that, but as you said, nobody's going to spend a penny more just because there's a value. Maybe a few governments, but the breadth of the industry is not. Just like you said, and I mean we see that a lot of times. What this American book retailer is doing with their infrastructure, yeah, they throw so much money at the startups, and they're locked in. Yeah, we have 5 customers that say we would love to go away from Amazon and use your tech stack, but unfortunately you can't bribe us. Yeah, so back to the
behaving like a drug dealer.
No, I'm not saying that. Yeah, I said bribe. I'm not saying your drug dealers, U.S. software companies, and drug dealers would be a different discussion, and probably after the second glass of wine, okay, or champagne, as we heard earlier. So, but seriously, to the educated protectionism, I don't think it's about protectionism in the economic protectionism, but it's about making values understandable, transparent, and thus decidable at a board level, yeah, where the big decisions is. I mean, we as a startups and scale-ups, of course, love every deal, whether it's 5K or 500K, but at the end, if we want to go to the scale-up mode, we need the 7-digit and 8-digit deals that our American peers make when they scale up. And this will need, what you just said, you need to be able to decide for a European scale-up without having the fear of being fired instead of going for Google, Amazon, or the others. And this is something which protectionism doesn't help, but education helps.
Well, it's a tricky question. On the principle, I think it's never a good idea to protect markets. It's a different concept of protecting the industry. Protecting market is closing the borders, right? And I think it's not a good idea. It becomes tricky because, as we said in the previous roundtable, we have to protect the data. So how can we protect the data if we don't close the markets? If we let the data flow through different vendors around the world, how is it possible to master the data and keep the control on this data? So it's a bit tricky, but I think the main philosophy principle is that we have to play with the same cards and put in place, implement the principle of reciprocity. We cannot play with different cards. We have to play with the same cards, otherwise we cannot be competitive. So when the Americans are protecting their markets, we have to do it or ask for reciprocity. Same thing for China, same thing for everywhere in the world. We cannot be the only naive democratic space in the world.
Well, it's a large question. First, to go from your point, I don't think that US, they are protecting their market. They are stimulating their market, which is a slightly different view. And if, again, I come back to our topic, which is a greenfield, a new market, they put the energy to create the market, not especially to protect themselves against a European company, no, and especially not, because they're happy to, for now, maybe not in the future, but for now, to take also some ideas and technology from European company. So the question is to stimulate the market. And to come back to your point, and to your point, I'm sure that not any one company will buy a product if they don't consider that there is a benefit compared to another one. This is a base, for sure. We need to respect this. So after we are on a specific market regarding cybersecurity, you have the question of regulation. So this is a stimulation. But after, there is again the question of product. That's simple. You need to have a product which gives a benefit. That's it. It's not because you are in cybersecurity that you can avoid this rule. After, the question is, when you speak about the top level of the company, it's important because the risk we are dealing with, it's sometimes long-term risk, sometimes not well identified, a data breach and so on, and the consequence for the enterprise or corporation can be enormous, not really well understand on the operational way, the consequences. So the top level can decide because there is a risk management for the company. But okay, there is a risk, the benefit of the product, and the regulation. This is a triptych in terms of analysis for the cybersecurity sales, let's say. That's it.
So thank you for this three-time and three-moment answer, a bit like a waltz. So I will now hand over to the audience for questions, if you have.
My question for all of you except Florent, does not apply to you. Consider that each one of your products, you are in green field. You are creating the market. The market does not exist. Would you build the same product the same way with the same value proposition that you do now? Forget that there's American and there's Chinese.
So, from a general perspective, the product not from the zeros and ones and the single lines of code that might differ here or there. From a general approach, we would do the same thing, because we've been working on the idea for many years, at least the two founders of our company, Sebastian and myself, because we believe that, and the underlying idea of what we created is that we need to be able to believe in and trust in the results code and data give us. Yeah, so we're not a kind of data protection company, even though we do protect data. Our belief is that we can deliver trust to the user of the code and the data, whilst both stay protected within the domains where it comes from. So that belief doesn't go away independently of whether there's a US company doing something similar or not. And we're not as research close as you are, but the last 12 months we've been spending 80% of our discussions about explaining what we really mean by what we do, because companies said, we never heard about it. Yeah? So we are kind of creating a market. The market is though evolving in both geos at the same time.
I think I would do some things different, because when we founded the company, we saw a problem. The problem that there was not enough security in the mobile app, and the mobile app is the core element that citizens worldwide are now interacting with companies. So we were coming from the problem of protecting the mobile lifestyle for consumers, for citizens. But they don't buy our product. It's the company, it's the app provider that is buying our company in order to make the life of their customers more secure. And that was, I'm not drastic, but this was wrong. This was not what was driving our customers to buy our product. Because in the end, it's just one customer with his data in that app. We shifted a lot in the first 2 years towards that buyer perspective is what is driving that our buyer with the money, the banks, the identity providers, and it was much more about ease of use, protecting against the compliance and regulation, and of course at the end protecting their own secrets and backend. So when we started saying, hey, we protect the endpoint, we protect the app, we protect the data of your customer, now we're saying we're protecting your endpoint with the APIs, with the data of yours, and that is sport. So I would say we were naive in the first year, saying, hey, there's a problem in society, we have a tech for it, let's do it, but there was no market. And I would think this is a difference when I talk with our peers, especially from Israel in cybersecurity and from the US, who would not have done it like that, who would start just the other way around. Like that took us like 2 years to understand really might be a good thing, but there's no money. in just doing a good thing. It needs to be a value for the company.
I'm sorry, but I didn't hear the end of your question, so I'm sorry, I cannot answer. Otherwise, maybe you don't mind repeating it.
So my question, consider that your product that you're providing now, you're providing it in a greenfield market. There is no competition. You are creating the market. Would you design the same product, the same way you did it, and with the same value proposition to the end customer?
I'm not sure. To be honest, I'm not sure. I think it's ongoing process. I mean, design and roadmaps, it's an ongoing process because the information that you have at a certain stage is not in our, let's say, development cycle or between, I don't know for my colleagues, but our development cycles vary from 2 years to 5 years, depending on the products and the complexity of the layers. It's very difficult in this world to make a choice at point, which will, and the product will be implemented in 5 years' time, when the technology on the one hand, the demand on the second hand, we talked about the geopolitical tensions, for instance, it's a major thing. The regulation might change in the window frame. So I'm not quite sure that we have done the same choices that the one we've done 5 years ago, to be really honest. It's difficult to adjust all along the way. It's very difficult. So that's the reason, the main reason we need a stable regulation. That's the first thing. Stable regulation, stable, let's say, employment policy, stable tax policy. It's the framework within we have to operate. So we need stability, and it's difficult to have stability in this world.
Thank you. Do we have one question? One last question. Please, go ahead.
Well, I have a question about protection of IP, of intellectual property. Don't you think that with the rise of all these hyperscalers, if we want to protect the intellectual properties of our company, we have an issue where all our software people are now just playing with Azure and other things, the framework of this hyperscaler. And for us, if we want to develop a new tool, new product, etc., there is a strong barrier, not a real barrier, but still a barrier. Because if we don't have people who speak our language, if we are not able to explain our product, what we are doing, and if we are obliged to do things just in this framework of this big hyperscaler, how will we be able to develop our product, to develop our ecosystem, and even just to find people working with us?
I can try. IP property and the cloud, let's say, consolidation, let's say, take it that way, maybe two different questions. One question is the number of customers that will be available if, let's picture out or figure out a 100% cloud-based economy. The number of customers have drastically reduced because if you're not in this cloud, you're nowhere anymore. So that's a risk, I agree. On the other hand, that's also an opportunity because when you're in this cloud, the number of customers that you can address is much, much, much larger than the one you can do it, you can expect to do it yourself. So risk and opportunities for this one. As for the IP property, I'm not sure to see the point because the fact to install your services or let's say software in the cloud, I don't see why it should jeopardize your IP. Maybe you can precise this point.
Well, if you use all the nice tools that are provided by this hyperscaler, everything that you will be doing will be by using this tool with all the easiness of using the pre-coding things, and then you will lose all the art of your core business.
Maybe trying to add two things. On the one hand, I believe that part of the IP we produce is protected by speed and flexibility. Yeah? So if we do something and produce a good product, and we need to be aware, from my point of view, in the software space, every product can be rebuilt by somebody who has enough money and resource. So speed protects you. And then the second part, and this is part of where we need to think as somebody who builds IP, do I want my product to be locked into a single pillar? And then we're in conflict. As business leaders, we are in conflict. Speed means ease. Let's go to somebody who has a perfect toolbox where I build my product that I want to sell to my consumers, whoever they are, whether it's B2B or B2C. So I use all these lovely tools, but I'm locked into some of those tools, as you mentioned. That's the one view. The other view is, if I want to accept that I need to be mobile, and for example, if you look into, and that might need to start in some of the big players and in some of the critical infrastructure players. All the big players have currently, let's say, a friendly requests by their governments to see what they do if one of the hyperscalers falls away. Can they still stay in business? So if we think about business resilience, as we had heard in the previous talk, you need to break the vertical pillars. That is a challenge because it conflicts with speed, and speed again with product, market fit, customers, all that stuff. So here we could potentially think of something that the Rainer van Jonas said. If the government leads the way in their decisions, that they ask not just the cheapest price, but having mobility in terms of platform mobility in their RFPs for new services, yeah? Then this can be a very attractive thing. And the government is so. Yeah, there's just an EU RFP out there from the European Office of Statistics or something like that, where they ask for something. But it's slow. They will take 2 years until they have the concept paper. So now it's the RFP, and then another 2 years to build the concept paper and the legal framework, blah, blah, blah. So this is horribly slow. Until then, 25 companies have built 89 products. So we're in that conflict. And I believe it's a business decision where you want to be or where you can be to survive in that market. Yeah? As you just mentioned earlier, yeah? You changed your address to the market over learning, even though you still deliver the same benefit to the consumer of the mobile device.
So now is the time to conclude. What we emerged from the previous panel with the necessity of adding services that customers will buy to storage, to data storage. Cloud cannot be just data storage. It needs to be services on top of that. I believe that we emerge from this panel with the clear conscience that we need to build beyond technology, beyond products. We need to build products that are fitted to a market, to a specific market, to a market desire, market appeal. And I believe that this is something that's a bit lacking sometimes in Europe, is that we sometimes, and I can testify about that, we sometimes build products for the sake of building a product, but not always checking that we have a good product market fit. This is what lacks in our startups, and this is what we need to improve as European players, truly European players, competing with the US for the sake of a better future for cybersecurity and for the sake of building resilience, European resilience in our digital infrastructure. Thank you very much, and thank you to the panelists.